So then, the initial academic ideas for my practice-led thesis project, Skin Deep on Abstract Painting and the Nature of Beauty, came during the spring of 2021 while preparing to teach an academic color theory course for undergraduate painters titled Relativity of Color. I teach at the City University of New York, which has an institutional vision statement that includes many things, especially that it provides an equitable education in a more inquisitive world. Because 75 to 80% of my Lehman College students are female immigrants or daughters of immigrants from post-colonial Caribbean countries or territories like the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. In addition to researching color from an exclusively traditional, formalist and scientific perspective, I also used, as I do in whatever class I'm teaching, painting, drawing, art history, a more broad, inclusive, auto-theoretical approach. This led me to reading about artists and art writers' investigations and uses of color to discuss their relationship to their own art, others' art history, culture, ethnography, gender, globalism, race, psychology, and science. It led to my initial philosophical inquiries, which were in axiology, aesthetics, and phenomenology. That's a good term, though. We might have coined it. Then, during September 2021, I became more personally and emotionally engaged in my project while preparing for one of the TransArt Institute's orientation sessions called Critiquing the Critique with Jean-Marie Kasparian. As I watched an assigned video, The Room of Silence, I thought again of my CUNY students, and I also thought of my own CUNY ethnic status, which is listed under a, quote, protected class, Italian American. I'm a second-generation immigrant via two of my maternal great-grandparents and one maternal grandfather who were early 20th century Italian immigrants to the United States, and through two of my paternal great-grandparents who were late 19th century Sicilian immigrants. What struck me in The Room of Silence, I don't know if anybody else who ever watched this, was struck by this at all. It seems like an insignificant detail in some ways. Which, by the way, The Room of Silence is a documentary of Rhode Island School of Design, we say RISD in the art world, RISD, students of color and mixed ethnicities, speaking about their white dominant classroom and life experiences. My impression upon hearing one specific art student's comment regarding her being referred to as exotic looking and what effect this has had on her. Her recounting of it set off in my own mind reverberating memories, like back to age 9, of people referring to me in exactly the same way. Even my husband, Barrett, who's sitting here. Because it's not as an insult, I didn't ever take it as an insult, but I also didn't ever know how to take it for whatever reason until I saw this video, age 59 at the time. Like this Room of Silence student, I also did not experience being called exotic looking as a compliment, nor as an intended slight. It simply puzzled me from as far back as I could remember to the present. Now, though, for the first time in my life, it dawned on me that it's one way within my own culture that I've been othered. In my own, quote, exoticism, it became the catalyst for my praxis work and for my thesis writing. It led me to pointedly researching feminist aesthetics, which along with color theory and phenomenology research helped me to establish the reason for my praxis, which is to develop a unique body of abstract paintings that will add more other creative works and academic writing to the creative research canons. Similarly, the aim of my praxis and thesis is to add my own feminine other artworks and academic writing to the record, which for millennia, like all other female expressions, was virtually excluded from scholarship. Viewer readers will be interested in the creative research project and written analysis because of the autoethnographic perspective of a 21st century, second generation Italian-American female post-feminist abstract painter academic's point of view, which includes her own or my own intersectional perspective or auto-theoretical perspective. It reframes and updates further the very recently regendered abstract painting genre, which is not a very old genre. It's the newest painting genre, like since the ancient Greek and Roman, even back to ancient Egyptian painting. If you studied art history, which I know at least half of you are coming from art history classes, we have had defined painting genres that include landscape, portraiture, historical painting, architectural painting. It's only, so that these genres are hundreds and hundreds of years old, and some of the genres that we know and recognize and love and fawn over in academia are thousands of years old. So this reframes and updates further this regendered abstract painting genre. The inclusion of my creative research and analytical written thesis into the academic record will contribute an other unique and contrasting perspective, which prior to what we call academic plasticity of the 1970s was not regularly included, quite the opposite. The academic and cultural problem that Skin Deep on abstract painting and the nature of beauty attempts to solve is to continue to make more inclusive the creative research and academic canons by including other historically discounted or omitted specifically feminine archives into the depositories. The scope of the project involves collecting relevant ephemera, thousands of digital images, producing original abstract paintings, 18 of maybe about 50 in the body of work so far, and eventually, hopefully in about 15 or 18 months, depositing a 40,000 word analytical written text into the creative scholarship record.
Gina, can I
Yes.
interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
So throughout today, we've had several classes come into the space, and I've asked students, well, is this the first exhibition you've ever encountered? And some people acknowledge, yeah, this is the first art show. And I'm assuming some of you also, this might be the first space that you've ever been in and thinking about what art is, or why we put it in galleries, and why is this important. So I have a question for the group, right?
Yeah.
When you in the space, walked into the space, what did you notice first, second, third? What aspects of this installation are you paying attention to? And you can raise your hand. I tend to pick on people, but I'm interested in what you're paying attention to. Who would like to offer a comment? Go ahead, please.
Okay, one then two.
Yeah.
One, go ahead.
I noticed the scale of that one, the use of color. I'm a big pink fan myself, so.
You are or not?
Are, yes.
Yeah.
And scale, color, I think
That's
that's
a lot.
That's good.
Yeah. What did you want to comment?
The purposeful display of everything. So like, let's say, like one of those paintings aren't placed over there because like they aren't the same in certain degrees.
How the work sort of interacts with each other. Yeah, that's an interesting note. Both of your points, color I'm so glad translates as into one of the first things you experience when you walk in the room. That's like ideal, because that is such an inspiration, not only for the body of work, but honestly as a painter. Like my first memories of finger painting, it's blue and yellow, fingers into the blue and yellow, and like sitting on my floor and seeing what happened. Like at 2.5, that resonated with me at a really very deep level. Like I was seeing myself create color, not that my 2.5 or 2-something-year-old mind could articulate. I'm sure I was just learning what was color, and part of why my mom put the finger paintings in front of me. So I love that that's a first response, and I love that, did you say purposeful, or, purposeful way. Lori and I talked about 2, 3, 4 different ideas for installations for months, if not longer. And I brought all of this work down here. We unwrapped everything one day, and one of her ideas was like at least one wall, we just like fill it what's called salon style, right? We're gonna use all that work in here. And then like the reality in the space, and then as I left, I realized, we forgot to calculate that the work had something to say when it was done. Like,
And it needs spacing, right?
Yeah.
To be able to isolate it out and to see it.
Yeah, and it had things, and just as you point out, there are these smaller dialogues going on, that like the work again has something to say within itself. If it's a visual linguistic expression, and this is a paragraph, maybe that functions as a sentence within the paragraph. Those are fair analogies. But an exhibition space, it becomes like the womb or the context for something else, something other, something more than was going on in my studio for 2+ years.
Other comments about what you're paying attention to, or do you not like it, I would like to make some comments here. The previous art history class, discussed the active paintings and then the more still paintings, right? And the group felt in general the stiller paintings were more comfortable to them, right? And of course it's a matter of taste or whatever, there's no right or wrong answer for it. That was a very interesting comparison to me. Any other comments?
Maybe you'll have more in a few minutes. The main argument or claim is that scholarly research fields of philosophy of art, which is what I'm doing my PhD in, aesthetics, color theory, and art institution collections have historically, for millennia, included only creative works and scholarly research of Caucasian males, while simultaneously, systematically excluding the scholarly and creative works by all others, and only recently, again within my lifetime, have we really actively started to include in academic institutions more inclusive, creative, and formal academic research. As others may include, create, participate in, add artifacts to do creative research and writings, and add them to art collections and academic institutions, only then do these dialogues, these theoretical discourses and philosophical debates become more diverse, richer, more broadly reflective of humanity's depth, diversity, and breadth. Specifically, my works in progress paintings, now I'm talking about the bigger, broader body of work that this came out of, this particular show, are motivated by my autoethnographic perceptions, by my perceptions of color, and by my subconscious. The palettes are influenced by the Fitzpatrick skin type scale, which is really directly the inspiration for this large scale piece to my right. It's been used since the 1970s to determine SPF levels required to prevent sunburn by its predecessor, the von Luschen scale, which was developed during the early 19th century, that classified ethnic populations via skin color and race, and not in a good way. By various beauty industry product promotional color charts, by my own olive complexion, which lines up with so many charts, middle shades often labeled olive or tan. And that led me to mixing the underpaintings of so many of the other more gestural canvases that you see. I inherited my coloring from my olive-complected parents, born to their respective olive-skinned parents. My great-grandparents and grandparents were marginalized in Europe, again, like so many tens of millions of other Europeans, specifically by Northern Italians and Northern Europeans, and after they immigrated to the United States for being impure, lesser than, they were called Mediterranean race people, and they were distinguished from or othered from the dominant Anglo culture in Western Europe. In slang, they were referred to as Dagos, Wops, Greaseballs, Guidos, and other pejoratives. They were among the 5 million Southern Italian refugees to the US and the 30 million globally who between 1880 and 1980 permanently fled their homelands. For context, during the same 100-year period, Italy's total population was between 30 and 56 million, meaning they purged half of the Italians out of their country. They do, by the way, suffer low birth rates for decades. By the mid-20th century, it was broadly acknowledged that no scientific evidence of race exists, and some, including the Mediterranean race, were subsumed. So while I am 91% descended from olive-toned Mediterranean peoples, DNA testing calculates I have 61% Southern Italian DNA and a combined 30% Greek, Ashkenazi, Jewish, Western, Asian, and North African DNA patterns. So along with all living olive-skinned populations, which by the way are only 4% of people on the planet, I and my generation's tan-toned counterparts are now counted white. This assimilated white status has afforded me access to educational, socioeconomic, and many other privileged opportunities that my Italian diaspora ancestors did not have, and neither did my Italian-American parents born here. My mother grew up in a red-lined neighborhood because Italians were discriminated against along with other brown and black populations in the 18th and 19th centuries. Sorry, the 19th and 20th, well maybe 18th, 19th, 20th, barely. Along with their basic need motivations, work, food, homes, they also immigrated with the hope that my generation would thrive in the ways that we do. So while I have heartache for the mistreatment and hardships they endured, still makes me emotional. It's like intergenerational wounding that I'm like seeking to heal or something. For example, my paternal great-grandfather was murdered on a return trip to visit family in Sicily. And I have regret for not knowing any of my other Italian-born relatives alive today even. I don't know their languages. I visited Italy, but I don't know those lands as home. Mostly, I have gratitude for my great-grandparents and grandparents' courage to get on a boat and to come to Ellis Island and create lives. I consider why the absorption of olive and tan-colored ethnic communities into whiteness is practiced. and I surmise that it stems from a kind of global dermachromophobia, a fear of skin color. I note that referring to one another in exclusively black and white terms is polarizing and flawed, because collectively, humanity is chromatically diverse and nuanced. Olive skin tones, a focus of the beauty industry marketing, only serves as a reminder that the current global capitalist system commodifies olive complexions as prior systems commodified my ancestors' whole bodies. They worked in coal mines and steel mills when they immigrated here, literally breaking their backs. Finally, I'm cognizant of the gestural mark making in my painting, which some have likened to abstracted graffiti. I acknowledge that there are psychosexual overtones and or a kind of figurative quality, not generally apparent in my oeuvre. That is, I've been a painter for almost 60 years, and I paint abstractly, and I paint with color, and I haven't been like in my body. I've been like out in big ideas, or in mathematics, or in abstractions, or in the universe, or inspired by philosophy. This is virtually inevitable, this sort of psychological, psychosexual, and or figurative interpretation, I think, is inevitable because of the skin tone palette, right? Inspirations. I like this, the fact that you can make sort of figurative associations with the work, and I regard paint as a sensual medium and painting as a consummately sensual act. This repeated lived experience of using this viscous, fluid substance, I find really affirming. It sort of fuels my creative existence and my creative life. I also wrote thesis questions, but I feel like I should stop and maybe I'll read them, maybe I won't. If you want to make other comments, pick up on, or ask any questions about anything that I wrote, or anything that you see in the gallery, we can chat again now.
Gina, it's like almost 4 to 6.
Okay.
Yeah, so now.
So we have
can
time?
Questions, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So I really, when you asked what are we paying attention to, I'm paying attention a lot to the scale. I feel like even the evolution of it might be 1 for gender, right, based on what you're talking about. So this tan that you see when you use Imagine.art to make an AI image, if you just ask for diverse people, everyone's about that color that you see the most of. So I feel like that's right on pulse.
A lot of artists work in this space, by the way. Like, I'm not the first one,
Sure.
but her name is Angelica. Now I'm blanking on her last name. She is a portrait photographer, and she goes around the world and takes, say, a photograph of several people in a community who volunteer, and then she uses the Pantone color guide in her digital system, and she picks the same center point on the nose to come up with the background, so that everyone is sort of framed by this flat Pantone-like color. She's got thousands of portraits. She's been, if you research this, again, sort of art and skin tone space, you'll come up with her work, articles about her, other contemporary artists too, some of them abstract, like me.
So I wanted to ask you, you talked about being in touch with your otherness,
Yeah,
and that you wanted to add your voice to the canon,
Yeah.
and a reward and hats off to all of us who choose to take that journey.
yeah.
I wanted to ask though, there's this balance though, between identifying with an otherness and then deciding to be a part of a canon. That's almost a, process,
It's
So what is that balance?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, maybe there's some inherent conflict in it. But the options are that I do participate or I don't participate, basically, right? And here, because maybe, because I am half painter, have that like, unbridled, how do you say, like chaotic, I have a real affinity to chaos. I love chaos theory, by the way, like that's one, tangent I can and have been like off on for some time. And then I have this academic side, and that is as developed and as important to me in my professional career and probably my own identity. It informs things like titles to paintings. This one, for example, which I told you already, is based on the Valmusian scale, but more specifically on the Fitzpatrick skin type SPF chart. Well, by the way, I resolved it after like 7 months when I saw maybe the 1,000th reference online in a researching like madly for how am I coming up with a title for this, or the solution to what was 6 colors that looked more like this. This color was previously a little lighter, right? Before I decided, oh, it's gonna be yellow. This, by the way, is the emoji skin tone chart that we all like thumbs up or thumbs down, or, the faces all change colors based on what we select, right? From this particular palette. Not this exact palette, but that's what inspired my final resolution to the piece. And what inspired the title? I ended up titling it Populus Humilis de Divinis, which is Latin, and the translation is people, humble and divine. And what I was thinking of when, by the way, this is in 3 segments, and it's stretched, but I worked on it for 7 months as one continuous roll of gessoed linen on half the time on the floor of my studio, and then I got it developed enough that I put it up onto the wall. And that's generally how I paint. Like, I don't even know what ends up. I'm just like, it's some kind of like ritualized, crazed trance state or something. And then like, when at least the underpainting is down, then I tend to put it up. I don't necessarily know what end is up, so I might be flipping and it might end up back on the ground. But there's this whole like dance that I do. But once this got onto the wall and more developed, I started thinking of Barnett Newman's Vir Heroicus Sublimis, which is his massive at the MoMA. So because I live in New York, then I get to see like so much of the stuff that I taught the first 14 years of my career. I taught art history and art studio for 14 years. And so, I could fall in love with painters, and did, throughout history. And that particular painting just kept coming to mind. No particular relationship color-wise, but something about its presence and or presentation, even in that very raw, unstretched state. And so then I thought, I have to kind of nod to him, but I also want to like update him, because Vir Heroicus Sublimis, which is again the title of this large mural-sized or mural-scaled red painting from the mid-20th century by Newman, translates from Latin into man, heroic and sublime, which just crystallizes beautifully 20th century painting, if not all of modernism, and maybe 6,000 year period, right? Like, man, heroic and sublime, like, Atlas, like we could go back to ancient Greek times with the sort of power and impact of that idea. And this idea, I hope and intend, is in stark contrast to that. I hope that we are all included that we can find ourselves somewhere in the scheme, right? Or feel like some identification with, even if it's an abstract identification with, some part of this painting anyway. And so I title it, again, Populus, Humilis, et Divinus, people, humble and divine, as an inclusivist statement. Also kind of, not without humor with the yellow emoji color, which I think someone in Japan initially invented, and those emojis, the emoji, which now vocabulary has grown, but that initial emoji vocabulary was isolated, and then it went viral, as we say. It was, by the way, a Texan designer, a black woman in Texas, whose daughter felt like she was not included in the yellow emojis. Like, wait, where was her fair representation? So her mother, the designer, created an earlier iteration of what became formalized in the last decade, maybe even less, using the Fitzpatrick skin type scale, which again has been around since the 1970s. So I don't know if I got way off on a tangent, but to that conflict, like we can let, and nothing like love Barnett Newman, for example. You go to the MoMA, it's always on display. It's like a shrine, and deservedly so. I am not dissing it at all, but if I don't put my 2 cents in 21st century, if I don't update with an idea, then how do we grow? How do we become more inclusive? Okay, other thoughts, questions, comments? What are you thinking? Yeah, go ahead.
When you made all of these that are pretty similar, did you make them all together at once, or
That's such a good question. So that, again, is kind of like a process question. And I've been working on the whole body of work. Again, these are 18 pieces, and the body of work at this point is somewhere in the neighborhood of 45, 48, maybe even 50. The early ones were more like studies. Inspiration, like this one of maybe a dozen that I did even smaller and a little bigger, but I was just like doodling and not sure where I was going to go with my ideas of color, abstraction, and the ideal paintings in my experience, the painters that I go to that I kind of can't get over in my whole life. Somebody I might be like really hot on for a decade or for a few years, and I'm like, I'm done. But other painters, I'm like gonzo over at 61 and I was at 18, right? People like Elizabeth Murray, lots of painters from the 20th century. So I've always favored abstracted work, whether it's abstracted figuration, this so-called New Image School, which is how we refer to the 1980s, which was a globalist movement and includes other painters that I can't get over, like Julian Schnabel, Elizabeth Murray, Susan Rothenberg. Maybe the list goes on, but probably those 3 are like standing out for me right now. And again, I just don't get over them. And then other painters from like the 50s, we refer to that period in contemporary art history as abstract impressionism. And those abstract impressionists followed immediately on the heels of the late 40s, early 50s abstract expressionists, people like Barnett Newman, who I already mentioned. I kind of never get over Newman. I never get over Rothenberg. I never get over Pollock. I never get over de Kooning. But those 1950s painters, different than the generation immediately before them. And the three that really always feed me, nurture me, creatively inspire me are Joan Mitchell and Cy Twombly, and there's another one. Oh yeah, he's maybe like the art historian in my head often has had this thought, which is it could be from this vantage point, 21st century, that we look back and we have to credit maybe not Pollock as the most influential, maybe not Picasso as the most influential painter of the 20th century, but maybe it was Philip Guston. Maybe he's the most relevant or significant, in part because he was just a freaking genius painter, no matter how you cut it, what period of him you're considering, but also because he started off as an abstract impressionist of the 1950s. He developed to like the height, along with Mitchell and Twombly and Helen Frankenthaler and several others. But then he went on, he moved out of the city in upstate. By the way, he was born and raised on the West Coast. Philip Guston, do you know who I'm talking about?
I do.
Okay, good. I just need to hear that somebody is following this train of thought. Yeah. Okay. So the Guston that then evolves into the precursor of the 1980s New Imagists. He's the one who leads the way, leads the charge for the whole second half of the 20th century. So there's my pitch to our historians who write in art history. I don't write in art history, I just teach that language and think that language and have art historical ideas. There's one. Philip Guston is the one.
We just discussed Frankenthaler and most of the classics, like Frankenthaler,
Yeah.
Clifford Still.
Yeah.
And they weren't so high on Pollock.
Yeah.
They're more on
He's kind of on the violent side or something.
Right.
Yeah.
They weren't so much fans of the Kooning either.
Oh,
but can you
too bad.
speak to back to when we were talking about feminists
Yeah.
in the language of abstract expressionism, and I was also telling that Lee Krasner and other women artists did not get the respect.
Yeah, they are now, boy.
Yeah,
We
right.
are cleaning our act up. Yeah, they have been in this century. I think in part, well, because the canon, the academic canon was just laid wide open with what we now call auto theory, or what we used to call postmodern theory base. It leveled the playing field. Everybody's voice counts now, and that's not easy for the team that only had the only voice before. And we feel the backlash of that all the time. But yeah, so we look at work by women, we look at work by people of color in the 21st century, and we didn't used to do that. And so art history is being revised and updated to acknowledge, I mentioned early on, Hilma F. Klint and the Five, these other 4 women painters of the very, very early 20th century, who actually did produce, as far as we know, at least in the Western world. This is not true in Islamic cultures that, by and large, we are still not fully integrated with, and I don't know, how do people want to be integrated. But in the Western world, in the Western canon, we acknowledge the early 20th century, Hilma F. Klint and the Five as the first pure abstractionists. And so that, again, kind of regenders art history, regenders painting, certainly regenders abstract painting. I find all that thrilling, but admittedly esoteric, relatively geeky, but
Okay,
exciting.
we're gonna end it there. Thank you so much.
Thank
Gina.
you.